All right, everybody, welcome into the channel, Black and Gold Breakdown, talking all things Pittsburgh Steelers. If you are watching on YouTube, please be sure to subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications so you get notified whenever the channel goes live, all that fun YouTube stuff. Like the video, share it around, comment, be part of the conversation in the chat. Appreciate everybody for tuning in. The biggest thing today, Daniel Jeremiah's latest mock draft. I believe this is his third one of this draft process. He has the Steelers taking quarterback Jaxson Dart out of Ole Miss. And I don't pretend to care too much about like mock drafts and things of that nature. But when it comes to Daniel Jeremiah saying stuff, I think that he is one of the more insightful and intelligent guys in the draft space today. So whenever he says something, I pay attention to what he says. And if he puts out a mock, I'll read it and see what he believes is going to happen. Because he's like I said, a smart guy who does his homework on these prospects. So I think that his word goes a long way in these conversations. And him predicting the Steelers to take Jaxson Dart, when you look at the players that were still on the board when he has the Steelers taking Dart, I mean, there's a large collection of really good receivers. Tet McMillan, Emeka Egbuka, Luther Burden, and then when it comes to the defensive tackle landscape, Derek Harmon, Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, all on the board at the time of the Steelers taking Dart. And in his little write-up, he still predicts that the Steelers are going to take Aaron Rodgers. So it feels like for his vision, Aaron Rodgers is the quarterback for 2025, gives the Steelers a year to groom Jaxson Dart and get him ready to take over in 2026 when Rodgers is no longer there. So from that perspective, it doesn't make it makes sense from the standpoint that he, goes with, all right, you bring in a legend quarterback to try to win this year. And then in 2026, you give it to your first round rookie quarterback and then go from there. Which, there's worse ideas in terms of what they could do at the position. But Dart has become like one of the more polarizing guys in this draft, where he's shot up draft boards in the the postseason process, during the Senior Bowl and the Combine. So I think that we see a prospect like this. We see multiple prospects like this every year, where they're projected, day two guys going, the third round, and then hell, like during the season, like you could see mock drafts with him going in like the fifth round, day three. And now all of a sudden, he's a first round pick. Like I push back a lot on this whole, the combine drills and, these all-star games and whatnot. I don't think that you'll learn more about a guy, doing drills than you do in games. That's not to say that there isn't anything to like about Dart. He seems to have a good arm. By the way, let me throw in the caveat of this. I'm not going to pretend that I'm grinding Jaxson Dart tape. I'm not. I'm not one of the guys in this space who are big college football tape grinders. So if you're coming for me for that, go to Derek Bell for that. If you want Steelers and tape grinders, he does an incredible job at it. You're much better to find stuff like that with him than me. Or JP Acosta, who's very good at it as well. And if you follow this channel a lot, you know how good of a friend I am with JP. So go follow those guys for that type of stuff, because I'm not your guy for it. I'm not sitting here grinding college football tape. It's not my thing. From what I have seen of Dart, it's got a good arm, can run really well, which isn't, any sort of modern quarterback, you're going to have some level of mobility. But I think that, in the games of his that I did see during the season, it wasn't something where he was like a one read guy and go. I think that he gets through his progressions pretty well, has the arm strength to make good decisions over the middle of the field. But, there is some things that are lacking in terms of footwork and things of that nature where he becomes like this polarizing guy. No, I wouldn't take him in the first round, especially if I'm the Steelers in that position where there's 3 really good receivers and 3 really good defensive tackles that you could take. And if they do add Rodgers, or even if they don't, if Rodgers is the guy, great. If he's not, roll with Mason Rudolph for the year, bring in another veteran and roll with that. Get a quarterback in 2026. It seems that you're gearing up to move up for a guy anyway with all these comp picks that you're gathering this offseason. So that is what makes the most sense to me. And not to say that Jaxson Dart can't be successful at the next level, but I just don't understand why the Steelers would do it. When, again, it seems like they are very much gearing up to take a guy in 2026 in Pittsburgh, gathering up all these comp picks to trade up to get a guy, whether that be Drew Aller, Arch Manning, or what have you. But that feels like the direction they're going in, not taking Jaxson Dart this year. I think the best thing that you can do is build the best roster possible for whoever you do draft in 2026. And so if you can get a Kenneth Grant or a Derek Harmon or a Walter Nolan, absolutely do that and run. Or if you want to triple down on receivers, assuming that they keep George Pickens this year, I don't think it's out of the question that they move him. But if he does stick with the Steelers through 2025 and they move him in 26, then drafting a guy in the first round here, whether it be Egbuka or Luther Burden or Matthew Golden or Tet McMillan, having him come in this year and giving yourself a really good trio of guys and then setting up that draft pick to become the new number 2 opposite of DK Metcalf next year, I think that that's a good idea as well. I don't think that taking Jaxson Dart would be the smart idea when you can just build up as good a roster as you possibly can and then get a rookie quarterback next year and see if he's your guy. This year, again, if Rodgers signs, then great. Then you got him for the year, and then next year you focus on the draft. If he doesn't, then you do the exact same thing with Mason Rudolph. And if you want to bring in a veteran like Joe Flacco to be a backup or push to be the starter, or if you want to bring in somebody like, a Carson Wentz, or if you can trade for a Tyrod Taylor, somebody just for the 2025 season, then you do that. But I don't think that going quarterback and trying to find the future at the position for the Steelers should happen this year. I think that there's 2 guys that are like consensus potential franchise guys. And I think it was Lance Zierlein who did the scouting report for NFL media for Dart, has him labeled as a good backup with the potential to develop into a starter. So, there are questions there, certainly. Again, not to say he can't be successful, but I just don't think that the Steelers are the team to do it, at least not in the first round. Like if he's like a few years ago when Pickett was taken in the first round, he was the only guy taken in the first round. And in mock drafts throughout the entire process, you saw, Malik Willis going number 1 overall, and Matt Corral and Sam Howell, and like plenty of different guys being like projected first round quarterbacks that didn't go till day 3. So if that is a situation where you can get Jaxson Dart in the 4th round, then sure, you take a flyer there, I guess. Even then, though, you look at all these quarterbacks that have been taken after the first round in the last handful of years, they don't end up being anything. So I think that is a little bit of a waste of a pick too. Now, sure, you can make the argument, well, if Dak Prescott was a 4th round pick, we've seen guys that are, taken in the middle of the draft end up being starters, but they're very few and far between. For every Dak Prescott, you're going to get a Matt Corral or a Malik Willis or a Jake Haener or, I don't know, Ian Book. Like, in large part, these guys are taken in the middle of the draft because they aren't good enough to be starters in the NFL. And if you're the Steelers, I don't see the purpose of blowing a draft pick on a guy who all but certainly isn't going to develop into your guy anyway. So I think that, and again, Daniel Jeremiah, very smart guy. I think the smartest in the draft space when it comes to, the big names who do their homework on all these prospects, know what they're talking about. I just don't see the value of Pittsburgh being the team to get Jaxson Dart. Again, I can hear the argument of, well, if they really like him and they have Rodgers this year, or look, even if they don't, they can still just start Mason Rudolph this year and give Jaxson Dart a year to develop, just completely redshirt him. Don't throw him to the wolves when you don't have to and kill his confidence. Get him ready to be an NFL starter and try to develop him into that for a year. I can get the thought process behind that. I just think for me personally, he just doesn't feel like a first-round talent at quarterback. And it would feel like a waste of a first-round pick if they would do it, especially with all the talent that would be left on the board should Daniel Jeremiah be right. When you've got a Ted McMillan and a Luther Burden, a Emeka Egbuka, and then guys like Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, and Derek Harmon still on the board, the Steelers just need to build this roster and then take a guy in 26. That feels like the smarter thing to me. And I would say probably the vast majority of fans, too, would feel that way. Harvey says, no Dart in the first, Howard in the third. I got to tell you, Will Howard sucks. I don't understand the sudden infatuation with Will Howard. He's not good. That would be a waste of a third-round pick. I don't think he's going to be anything either. I think Dart has a better chance of being something in the NFL than Will Howard does. I don't understand the infatuation with Will Howard at all. Not good. Robert says, do you think having DK and GP make any quarterback look good? No, because you still got to be able to get the ball to him. The Steelers had Antonio Brown and a good collection of receivers when Landry Jones was in, and Landry Jones didn't look good. Outside of that one game against the Cardinals where he came in, but even then, Martavis Bryant caught, a short pass and ran it 70-odd yards. So it wasn't like Landry Jones was putting, a drop in a bucket downfield for Martavis Bryant. And then he started a game against the Chiefs when Ben was hurt, and he played like absolute just butt. So I don't think that, you still have to be able to throw the ball and get it to these guys. And your entire offensive game plan can't just be, 25 deep shots a game. You got to have some semblance of decision-making underneath, and it can't just be, all right, run the ball, play action, launch. You got to have some semblance of another pass of, other things in the pass game as well. So no, I don't think that they'll make any quarterback look good. I think you have to have some talent at the position. Now, I think Mason could succeed with both of them because we saw him succeed with George Pickens. So I think that you could have a fine year with Mason as the starter, because what Arthur Smith's offense is very much catered to what Mason does well, which is a lot of the, the play action deep ball game. But Mason is also capable of just hitting the check down, taking what's there, not forcing things. He showed tremendous growth from that 2019 year where he had to play 10 games because Ben was hurt, up to when he got the ball and got the call in 2023 at the end of the year. So I think that but I've done a complete 180 on everything, by the way. I was very much, no, it's going to be Rodgers. And I still think it's going to be, but at this point I just roll with Mason. I know I was very against it at first just because, all right, he's a backup. I shouldn't say I was against it. I just didn't think it was going to happen. I've definitely come around to the idea of it more. So I'm fine with Mason as the guy because I think that he would fit well in what Arthur Smith's offense is. Who do you think? Who in 2026 would you draft? I mean, I'm clearly biased, but I would like Drew Aller. I think that in terms of just what he brings to the table as an athlete, what he can do with his arm, the decision-making is questionable at times. We definitely saw that against Notre Dame, where he throws a pass into triple coverage to Tyler Warren in the end zone. That's stupid. Those things you need to get weeded out. He's certainly not a perfect prospect, but I think in terms of just raw athleticism, size, arm strength, I would like to see Drew Aller be a Steeler. I don't want to make the lazy Josh Allen comparison just because I don't think that any quarterback is just going to end up being as good as Josh Allen. But in terms of like what he, I've seen people say, oh, he's similar to the player that Josh Allen was coming out of Wyoming. I can see that. Do I think he's going to become Josh Allen? No. But if he becomes a reliable starter who can run around, make plays, and give you something in the run game as well, I would be very happy with that. And again, I'm clearly, a Penn State fan. There's obvious, some rooting interest in it where I would love to see Drew Aller go from my favorite college team to my favorite NFL team. But, if it's Arch Manning, I'm going to be happy. If it's, I don't know about the Nico kid from Tennessee because I just don't think he's going to be very good at the NFL level. For some reason, Steelers fans seem to have like a big old, like, are pushing for it to be him. By the way, I don't know how to say his last name either. I think it's Nico Iamavella. I probably just butchered that, so forgive me. But I think that would be somewhat of a waste too. He doesn't play in an NFL offense whatsoever. And I'm kind of talking out of both sides of my mouth because I've been campaigning for them to trade for Joe Milton. But Joe Milton at least showcased something in Week 18 last season when he came in to play for Drake May. And he's had a year in an NFL system to learn. So that said, like, I don't think that the Nico kid is going to be a star at the NFL level. He was very inconsistent at Tennessee, which is just the most bare bones non-NFL offense ever. It's a lot of screen passes and go routes. So not really a whole lot of in between there. So I would prefer Drew Aller. And I completely acknowledge how biased I am in that because I'm a Penn State fan, and I would love to see Drew go from Penn State to Pittsburgh. That would be cool. But it's not just that. I think that, I wasn't campaigning for, back in the day for Trace McSorley to be a first-round pick. Drew's going to be a first-round pick, barring anything catastrophic. I think he's going to be a top 5 pick. He has a chance to be the first quarterback off the board. Had he come out this year, he would probably still go in the first round. He probably would have fell a little bit after that Notre Dame game. But there was a good chance he was going to be a first-round pick this year. The quarterback class next year is a little bit better, but he's a reason why it's good. So I would love for it to be Drew. But it's almost guaranteed they'll have to trade up to make it happen because they're not going to lose enough games to just be in position to take him. But I would like for it to be Drew Aller if, that is something that can happen. So that's my pick. And then if they decide to start Drew right away, okay. If they want to have Mason be the bridge and not rush into starting Drew and do something similar to what they could do this year if they take a quarterback, but I would much rather them do it next year. They signed Mason Rudolph to a 2-year deal. If it's going to be Rodgers this year, fine. Let Mason start in 2026, or at least start out the year as a starter. Drake May didn't start the year as New England starter, and they went with Jacoby Brissett. And once they were like, all right, this is unbearable, we're going to put the kid in and, let him play. Drake May played well. So if they want to start off the season in this situation with Mason as a starter in 2026, I'm fine with that. If you don't want to rush Drew, that's fine. If you feel confident enough in Drew to start week 1, that's fine. We saw it work out for the Commanders in starting Jaden Daniels. CJ Stroud was a week 1 starter. It worked out pretty well for him. So, you can just start him right away, and that's cool. But they also don't need to feel the pressure to start him right away when you got Mason there to do it. But I do think that the success of CJ Stroud and Jaden Daniels is going to give teams more confidence to be like, all right, we can start this guy right away and see if he can be successful right away. But Drew Aller would be my pick. And again, if you're just joining us live, Daniel Jeremiah predicting that the Steelers will draft Jaxson Dart at number 21 overall in the 2025 NFL draft. Look, in talking to Jaxson at the Senior Bowl, like he seems like he's got a good head on his shoulders. It's nothing against him as like a person. I just don't think that would be the right pick for Pittsburgh. Especially with the players that are still on the board in this hypothetical mock draft that Jeremiah put together. Because if you still got 3 really good receivers and Ted McMillan, Emeka Egbuka, and Luther Burden on the board, I would much rather them take one of those guys to come in, be the third receiver, more than likely get bumped up to the number 2 next year when the Steelers move off of Pickens. And then, just make the move like that, or take one of the defensive tackles that'll be available, whether it be Kenneth Grant, Walter Nolan, or Derek Harmon. But I don't see any sort of, value in burning a first-round pick on Jaxson Dart, who is a questionable prospect who, throws a pretty deep ball, but can also, in reading the scouting report by Lance Zierlein, let me make sure that this is right, because I don't want to give improper credit here to whoever did it, but I'm pretty sure it was, yes, so it was by Lance Zierlein. The NFL comparison that he gave Jaxson Dart was Gardner Minshew, which I think is kind of on the nose, because Minshew can move around a little bit. He gets, he'll fire it downfield. And in terms of what, maybe it wasn't Zierlein for the prospect grade. I want to say this might have been Chad Reuter for the prospect grade. But regardless, he was given a 6.17, which for a prospect grade comes out to a good backup with potential to develop into a starter. So, smart people in the NFL draft landscape are saying, like, this guy could end up being a starter, but it's going to take some work. And if there's one organization in the NFL who I don't trust when it comes to developing quarterback, it's the Steelers. Because even with the Patriots back in the day, right, when Brady was there, they still turned multiple other quarterbacks into starters. Obviously, Jimmy Garoppolo got a massive contract with the 49ers and was their starter for a little bit and helped take them to multiple NFC title games and a Super Bowl. Jacoby Brissett has turned into a journeyman bridge quarterback and really high-end backup. Brian Hoyer got a starting job in the NFL. Like, everybody knew, okay, Brady's going to be the guy, and he's going to be until he doesn't want to be, but they were still able to develop quarterbacks and turn them into high-end backups, high-end bridge quarterbacks, or in Jimmy Garoppolo's case, a starter in the league for multiple years that went to a Super Bowl. The Steelers, they bring in Landry Jones, not good. Dennis Dixon, who had one fine game that he started week 1 against Atlanta when Ben was suspended. Didn't really turn into anything. I'd say Mason Rudolph is by far the best quarterback that they've developed in the past 20 years, outside of Ben, obviously. The best one that they've developed under Ben. Because outside of that, they haven't done anything. Kenny Pickett was a complete waste of time. He wasn't good and he's not good, but the Steelers also didn't do him any favors. Both of those things can be true. So for a prospect like Dart, who's not going to be ready to start and is graded as a guy who's going to start off as a backup and would need development to turn into a starter, I don't think the Steelers make sense in that regard either, because they can't develop quarterbacks. Maybe if they had a head coach like Kevin O'Connell, that would be like, all right, yeah, fine. You take a bet on the upside and take the bet that Kevin O'Connell will, hone in on that upside and that it'll outweigh any negatives. Fine, I get it. Green Bay. All right, yeah, I can trust Matt LaFleur to, develop a quarterback. San Francisco. Kyle Shanahan develops quarterbacks every other year. Even with Jimmy at the helm. They bring in, obviously, Brock Purdy's the last pick of the draft, and he goes to a Super Bowl too. Sam Darnold goes to the 49ers, gets, a nice little rehab stint, gets a $10 million contract for a year from Minnesota, and then has a breakout year. So, if the Steelers had a quarterback guru, forward-thinking, offensive-minded, modern head coach, then yeah, I'd be like, all right, I wouldn't necessarily love a Jaxson Dart selection, but I could see why you'd do it, and maybe it ends up paying off in the end. They don't have that on their coaching staff. It's Mike Tomlin. Mike Tomlin, who would love to win every game 14-13 if he could. and doesn't have a progressive bone in his body when it comes to the modern NFL. So the Steelers aren't the place to go if you want to develop a quarterback. So in that sense, it doesn't make sense to me either. And again, if they had a Ben Johnson or a Kevin O'Connell or a Matt LaFleur or a Kyle Shanahan, then fine. But they don't. They have Arthur Smith and Mike Tomlin. Now, credit to Art, because even with the horrible quarterback play he had in Atlanta with Desmond Ridder, he still put together a competent offense that Desmond Ridder played somewhat well in. Wasn't consistent whatsoever, and there was more bad than good. But the good showed up in the scheme. It was like, all right, Art, I can see the vision of what you're trying to do. You just don't have the dude to do it. So Art, and I've said this before about Art, not a bad offensive coordinator, not a great one either. I think he's a perfectly mediocre offensive coordinator. We saw that a lot last year, where even in the loss against Baltimore, was in his bag, very much so. And if not for two horrendous Russell Wilson mistakes, they probably win that game. So I trust Arthur Smith in terms of quarterback development more than I would trust Mike Tomlin. But at the same time, everything comes back to Mike Tomlin in the end. And he's far too conservative of a coach to help a young quarterback take steps forward. I think that when it comes to a guy like Dart, who is looked at as a project, the best that he would ever be would be like a middling starter. That is the absolute peak. The guy with, real physical talent that, in any other offense with a progressive offensive-minded coach, he could maybe take the next step and be, a higher-level starter. But in Pittsburgh, you're just not going to find that. And this isn't me trying to bash Mike Tomlin or anything like that, even though, he's earned that. I'm not trying to turn this particular episode into that. But when it comes to development of the position, the Steelers aren't good at it, which is going to leave me worried for whoever they end up taking eventually, whether it be this year or next, because I just don't think that they have the right guy at the helm to develop him. Harvard says, do you think we have our first losing season, or do you think we go back to 10-7? I think it'll be 9 or 10 wins. It's always going to be that. Which is, we've talked about it plenty of times before. It does more harm than good. I think any reasonable fan is going into this season with the thought of, look, if they can just win a playoff game, this will be a massive success of a year. This team doesn't have Super Bowl aspirations. If they bring in Aaron Rodgers, maybe those expectations go up a little bit, but even if they do have him, I'm not going to be like, all right, Super Bowl or nothing. If they win a wild card game, I'll say, job well done. That met the expectations that I was hoping for. Obviously, I'd love for them to win a Super Bowl. I just don't think that that's going to happen. But as I've said before, I would rather cling to the possibility of being surprised with Rodgers and him having a year like Brett Favre did in Minnesota in 2009, when he throws 33 touchdowns and only 7 picks, and the Vikings go to the NFC Championship game 1 year after Brett just completely collapsed down the stretch with the Jets. I would rather cling to the possibility of that than Russell Wilson, which, by the way, it's not going to be Russ. I think it's very much signed, sealed, delivered. It's not going to be Russ. If they wanted Russ, it would have happened already. And I think that if it's not going to be Aaron, they're rolling with Mason this year, which I'd also prefer Mason. Again, I'd rather cling to the hope of being surprised than walk into the season knowing exactly what's going to happen. So no, I think they'll win 9 or 10 games. And if they get into the playoffs, they'll be the 7 seed or the 6 seed maybe. They'll lose to, take your pick of Kansas City, Buffalo, or Baltimore. And then we'll be right back here at this time next year, except we'll have a little bit more excitement because the draft is in Pittsburgh. They're going to take a quarterback. It's going to be pretty exciting. So I think me personally, obviously I'm going to be, in it during the season and whatnot, and be happy to be watching them every Sunday, but I'm not going to have any sort of Super Bowl hopes. Darwin says, if they sign Aaron Rodgers with the defense revamped, they will be in the Super Bowl conversation. Darwin, I love your optimism, but I do not share it. I don't see that at all. And again, I would love to be surprised. And there is a world where Aaron Rodgers does have like a Brett Favre-esque year in his first year with Minnesota, plays out of his mind, and all the stars align and the Steelers make a little bit of a run. That would be great. I just don't personally foresee it happening. But I would love to be wrong. Would love to be wrong. Mason is better than Russ. I wouldn't go that far. I think that it just makes more sense to roll with Mason rather than Russ, because as we talked about on here before, and Alan Saunders of Steelers Now reported a few weeks ago that Russell Wilson legitimately angered some people in the building after reports of his strained relationship with Arthur Smith were leaked. And that genuinely pissed off a lot of people in the building. And so I just don't think, it's pretty evident they don't want him back. If they wanted him back, he would be a Steeler right now. As soon as Justin Fields went to the Jets, they would have said, all right, Russ, we'll take you. But instead, they're playing the Aaron Rodgers game because they don't want Russ. So I think that is all but, it's all but done that he's, now look, could something dumb happen and they bring him back and they all kiss, make up, and sing Kumbaya? Maybe. I don't foresee it happening. But there is a world where he comes back and I look like an idiot. I don't think that happens, though. I think that if the Steelers wanted Russ, he would be there. And like I said, I would much rather have Mason than Russ. Cam Hayward, by the way, talking on his podcast, which came out, I want to say it came out today. But he was talking about just the whole Aaron Rodgers situation and whatnot, and trying to find the exact quote here because I don't want to just be talking out of my butt. But he was very supportive, like vocally supportive of Mason, in which he said, all right, so on Mason Rudolph, he said, when he stepped in for us, he was ready. If we don't sign a quarterback and we go in there with Mason, we feel good about it. Excited to have him back. He's a guy for the locker room. A lot of guys vibe with him. So I think as a locker room presence, Mason's good. Cam Hayward, made that pretty clear. Cam Hayward also said, in terms of Aaron Rodgers, he's kind of unloaded. He just seems pissed and annoyed, which fair enough. I'm sure a lot of the guys are, but he said, in terms of recruiting Aaron Rodgers, I ain't doing that darkness retreat. I don't need any of that crap. Either you want to be a Pittsburgh Steeler or you don't. If you want to be part of it, so be it. If you don't, no skin off my back. So, it appears that I think most fans are kind of in the realm of all right, man, either come here or don't, but we're tired of waiting. Make up your mind. And it seems like the players are starting to think the same thing. And the fact that Cam Hayward says that on a podcast, I mean, that says a lot. So we'll see what it ends up being. I still think it's going to be Rodgers. But at this point, and I said it today, I've done a complete 180. I'm like, dude, either make up your mind or just roll with Mason. Because remember, when they signed him, I was like, no, it's not going to be Mason. People need to just stop saying, oh, it's going to be Mason Rudolph. Now I think I've come around to the idea. Russ is limited and doesn't use the middle of the field, which eliminates Muth and Calvin Austin and slants to George Pickens. Mason actually threw a slant for 80 yards. Mason balled out, and Canada's offense without DK. Yeah, I think that you can make the case that in terms of what Mason does well right now, that maybe he would be better than Russ. But especially from what we saw from Russ down the stretch last year. So I can hear where you're coming from. Matt says, hey, Jared, I think Mason will use the middle of the field more than Russ did. Yeah, that seems to be the general consensus. And look, Mason last year, when he came in for Levis, the numbers didn't light up the world or anything like that, but he also was throwing to nobody with a nothing offensive line in front of him. And all things considered, did fine. I think he went 1-4 as a starter, which again, he had no defense around him, no weapons, no offensive line, and he still played relatively okay, all things considered. So I think with literally everything better around him, he can play well enough for the Steelers can scavenge together 9 or 10 wins. But we'll see. But again, if you're just joining, Daniel Jeremiah predicting that the Steelers will draft Jaxson Dart. No, there's a large section of fans who would like to see Jaxson Dart. Again, I don't fall into that category. I think they should just wait for 2026, take the quarterback and a much deeper, much better quarterback class. It's in Pittsburgh next year, the draft is. So, like, what better way to, host the draft than welcome in a hopeful new franchise quarterback? And with all the comp picks that they're gathering up, that seems to be what they plan on doing anyway. Completely respect Daniel Jeremiah in terms of his knowledge and everything. I think he's the most knowledgeable guy in the draft space. I don't think it will be Jaxson Dart. At least I hope it isn't going to be Jaxson Dart. I hope the Steelers draft show and trade for Joe Milton. I think they would do one or the other. I don't think they would do both, considering that would give them 4 quarterbacks at that point. And look, I see a lot of people on the Tyler Show bandwagon. I think that any pick of a quarterback after round 1 just feels like you're burning a pick. Maybe round 2, because Jalen Hurts was a second-round pick. I get that, but by and large, taking a quarterback after round 1 is just a waste of a pick. Look at all the quarterbacks who have been taken after round 1 in the last 5 years. None of them have panned out to be anything. I don't think Tyler Show is going to be the guy who lights Pittsburgh on fire and becomes the starter. So I think that if you want a backup quarterback, just go sign one. I would much rather you take somebody at a position that has a chance of developing into something in the 5th, 6th, 7th round than just burning it on a quarterback who isn't going to do anything. They did the same thing with Chris Oladokun in the 7th round, and then they released him before the season even started. Just wasted a pick. And again, it was a 7th round pick, whatever. But sign a guy or draft a guy who at least has a shot at turning into something rather than taking a quarterback who, at best, you take him in the 6th round, you think he could be a backup. It doesn't make any sense. I think Dart is just another Kenny Pickett. I mean, in terms of like how they play, they're nothing alike. Like Jaxson Dart has a nice arm. I think he gets through his progressions well. Again, I didn't watch every Ole Miss football game. From the ones that I did, though, this is just my general takeaways. And like I said at the beginning of the show, I'm not your guy when it comes to like, oh man, grinding college football tape. I don't do that. Go watch Derek Bell do all that. He's very good at it. He's very smart, very knowledgeable, does a lot of good Steelers coverage. If you want that, go watch his YouTube channel. I highly recommend it. He's very smart, very good friend, very good guy. Watch JP Acosta do it on Twitter, Blue Sky, wherever you follow him. Follow people who do that. I'm not your guy for that. I can only tell you from what I've seen. And in the 3 or 4 Ole Miss games I watched this year, that's what I saw. So I think that when it comes to who they are as players, Dart and Pickett are nothing alike. Did you forget about Brock Purdy? Brock Purdy is very much the exception, not the rule, and he was put in a perfect situation where plenty of quarterbacks have succeeded with Kyle Shanahan, a smorgasbord of all pros on both sides of the ball. If the Steelers took a 6th-round quarterback, he'd be coming into the league with questions in terms of how progressive they are offensively. They don't have a quarterback guru there. Like, you don't have a Kyle Shanahan. You don't have the NFC All-Pro team on both sides of the ball. So situations matter for quarterbacks. And we've seen Kyle Shanahan take Jimmy Garoppolo to a Super Bowl, and the second that Jimmy Garoppolo left Kyle Shanahan, he became a backup. He lasted a month and a half as the Raiders starter, and they're like, actually, we're going to start Aiden O'Connell because Jimmy Garoppolo's not good. So, and by the way, Brock Purdy, starting caliber quarterback, he's not like an elite starter. I think he's, one of those middle of the pack guys. So destinations matter when it comes to these sort of things. And the Steelers, like I pointed out earlier, Steelers aren't good at developing quarterbacks. At least when the Patriots had Tom Brady. They still developed quarterbacks behind him. And if the Steelers had a long track record of doing that, then I would hear you on it. Yeah, okay, take a 5th-round flyer on a guy if they'd been successful in doing that in the past. Mason is the only one who's had any level of success that the Steelers have drafted. Dennis Dixon didn't really develop into anything. Landry Jones sure as hell didn't develop into anything. Chris Oladukin was released immediately. Kenny Pickett was a nightmare. Like they don't have any sort of, in the Mike Tomlin era, good history of developing quarterbacks. And that's just factual. Darwin says Josh Dobbs. I would argue Josh Dobbs' development went better after he left Pittsburgh. It's not like he did anything when he was with the Steelers. He went to Jacksonville and then Tennessee and then was groomed in the Tennessee system more than he was with the Steelers. Matt says, I want Drew Aller. So, obviously I'm a Penn State fan. I would like that too. But not just because I'm a Penn State fan. I wasn't banging the table saying Trace McSorley should be a 1st-round pick. But in terms of just raw athleticism, arm talent, it's there. The decision-making needs honed in because he does make dumb decisions. We saw that on full display in the Notre Dame game where he threw the dumbest interception that I can recall seeing at that level. He also threw it into triple coverage in the end zone to Tyler Warren, which is what are you doing, Drew? So I think that in terms of just raw talent, there's a lot there. You just got to hone in on it. And again, I'm going to be nervous regardless of who they take because I don't trust the Steelers to develop a quarterback. No matter how much raw talent is there, I'm going to be worried. If they had a Matt LaFleur or a Kyle Shanahan or Kevin O'Connell, I would feel incredibly confident with whoever they draft. But because they have Mike Tomlin, I'm very nervous. And again, goes without saying, if you're just tuning in, I don't think that they should draft Jaxson Dart. I think that you roll with either Rodgers or Mason Rudolph this year and then go into Pittsburgh next year in the draft, take your hopeful future franchise quarterback, and maybe have a nice little Cinderella story there, drafted in Pittsburgh, and then ends up being the franchise guy. That would be pretty cool. But next year's class is so much better, so much deeper. It just makes a lot of sense. Developing a quarterback in the NFL is risky business anyway, promising if you have a good O-line and a vet ahead, but it doesn't come down to the head coach to be a quarterback guru usually. I would argue lately it does, though. And I agree, situations matter. I pointed that out earlier talking about Brock Purdy, but who is under the headset making the decisions also matters. If you have a very schematically smart, forward-thinking play caller head coach like the Packers do, like the Vikings do, like the 49ers do, like the Bears now do, I'm going to feel a lot more confident than a stuck in the past, not willing to change, defensive-minded head coach for a franchise that hasn't shown the ability to develop a quarterback in the modern era. So I think in this day and age, who the head coach is has a ton to do with quarterback development in terms of schematically, but also stability, which, Mike Tomlin would bring the level of stability, but the way that he wants to win games, which isn't changing, it's not going to help a young quarterback develop. But I think that's probably a good place to end this one today. If you're not already subscribed to the channel, please be sure to do so. For more of the Black and Gold Breakdown, be sure to turn on notifications so you know when I go live, not just for the Black and Gold Breakdown, but for my national podcast, The Pump Fake. Did a show with my good friend Taylor Kyles, who covers the New England Patriots yesterday, just talking about their offseason haul and what's next for them. So you can watch that on the channel, or you can go listen to that wherever you get your podcast. That's The Pump Fake with Jarrett Bailey. And again, if you're not already subscribed to the channel, please be sure to do so and be part of the conversation all off season long and throughout the regular season as well. I appreciate every single one of you for tuning in, making me part of your day. We will be back on the channel later on in the week. Until then, take care.